Hi, and thanks for watching Implementing Plaid in Bubble.io. This is Unit 7 on liabilities. My name is Brian Alderman. I'm the owner and principal of Lost Sheep Advisory. We're a boutique no-code consulting firm specializing in financial and business operations solutions. The Plaid plugin you're using was developed by me. I'm also the creator of ivyco.eco and the developer behind a number of other Bubble apps. If you want to work with Lost Sheep Advisory, you can get in touch in a number of ways. Email support for the Plaid plugin is always free. Get in touch at info@lostsheep.dev. We also offer on-demand Bubble office hours, development projects to help you execute your vision, and fractional CTO efforts to contribute strategy and expert ownership of your technology. You can check out all of our offerings and book time with me at lostsheep.dev. With that said, let's dive in. In this unit, we're going to be going over the Plaid Liabilities product. Liabilities could be known by a couple other names. It's basically lines of credit, loans, student loans, mortgages, and credit cards. Specifically, we're going to see here how to set up your database and workflows for credit cards, student loans, and mortgages. We're going to see one approach to how you could display this data in your application, and we're going to understand how to handle liabilities lifecycle events using Plaid Webhooks, by which I mean you make a payment and your balance goes down. Those kinds of lifecycle events. Typically, what I do with liabilities is, and you'll see here they're a little different than some of the other Plaid products. I will set up a different data type for each liability if I'm building something that cares about more than one type. If you're building something that only cares about, say, student loans, you won't need all these things. But for me, I'm going to build something that works with all the different types of liabilities and associate those different things to the different accounts. You'll also notice here actually, let's walk through this. So, from a previous video, you've seen that we've set up Plaid institutions. We've set up Plaid accounts. Those are pretty familiar. Now we're going to be setting up a whole bunch of other subtypes. We've looked at balances before. Balances will come into play here. Check out the balance video if you're interested in learning more about that. And very similar to balances, we're going to set up these other ones as children of this account type. So just like accounts had many balances in that balance video, an account can have many credit cards, mortgages, and student loans. Typically, in the real world, I've really only ever seen this be one-to-one, where an account, say a mortgage account, only has one mortgage in it, so one like 30-year fixed mortgage, or one credit card account only has one credit card in it. But in theory, there are things out there that could be more than one, so I usually set it up this way with a one-to-many relationship. One example I might think of there is a student loan. If you've consolidated it and it's owned by in the US, one of the big student loan servicers, then your one account at that servicer might have multiple student loan lines within it, or liabilities, individual liabilities within it. So that's why we set up the data model this way. We're going to see this in action here in a minute, but wanted to just give you an idea of how this works. So we're going to set up an account to have one or more credit cards, one or more mortgages, and one or more student loans. The other thing you might be thinking here, would I really have an account with more than one of these? Probably not. But because I want to keep my data type account the same across all the different account types, I set these up each as their own column in the account table, so that I can store all the different things kind of at a similar level. The last thing you'll notice, we'll get to credit cards here and bring this up in a little more detail, but credit cards have a subtable that'll become relevant. So this is a whole bunch of stuff you're going to be adding to your Bubble database. You don't have to do it this way. If your use case could work by just displaying the data in real time, that's a fair option. You can use the get data from external API call somewhere on your page, maybe in a repeating group, and get the data that way in real time from Plaid. That's a valid scenario too. Most of the time though, I see people putting liabilities data in the database because most of your use cases will need to edit some of that data or track it over time. So that's why we're going to set it up this way. So we're going to start out building credit cards, then we're going to work on mortgages, then we're going to work on student loans, then we'll put it all together of how you orchestrate all those different pieces, and then we'll look at lifecycle events. So let's go over to Bubble and dive right in. So we're going to start out here under my Data Types tab, under Data. And you'll see here we have already set up what we set up in previous videos. So we've got the Plaid institutions and Plaid accounts. Now we're going to add a whole bunch of other stuff to this database. I'm going to be working here from, in another window that I'm not going to show you, the Plaid docs, where it's Plaid liabilities and liabilities get. And what this does is show me, I come down here a little bit, this will show me for each of the liability types. So for instance, credit, mortgage, and student, what all the different data is for each of these, because it's different data for each type of use case. That's why I'm creating 3 different data types in the Bubble databases. They're all slightly different. So I'm going to be pulling this up and working through it to add the correct columns to my database. You can do it that way. You can watch this video and use that as your guide, or you can use the data that the API returns itself. I think that's probably the hardest way. So a number of ways you can do this, but just know that I've got this pulled up on another screen, and I'm just going to be going down the list of this, of the structure. So over in my Bubble database, let me just get that set up on another screen. There we go. So over in my Bubble database, the first thing I'm going to do is create a new type called Plaid credit card. And Plaid credit card is going to have a bunch of different fields. First, it's going to have the account it belongs to. That's a Plaid account. Then it's going to have the institution. You could do it this way. I found this to be a good way to do privacy rules, so I'll usually put the institution in there as well. It'll have the last payment amount. That's a date. Oops, sorry, that's not a date. Last payment amount is a number. Last payment date is a date. There's last statement balance. Last statement date. Minimum payment, that's a number. Next payment due, that's a date. And overdue, that's a Boolean or a yes/no field. Credit cards are a little different than the others, as you'll remember from this screen. In this case, credit cards can have multiple APR lines. So say you have a cash transfer rate that's different than your normal credit rate. All those different things will show up as a different APR line. So we're going to set that up as its own data type. So I'm going to do Plaid credit card APRs, and then Plaid credit card APRs. This is going to have the account that it's associated with, the institution that it's associated with, the credit card that it's associated with, and that's the Plaid credit card type that we created a second ago. Then this is going to have a balance subject to APR. That's a number. A last statement interest. This is last statement interest amount. That's a number. A percentage. That's the rate here. It's also a number. And a type. This will be like transfer or regular balance, that kind of thing. And then I need to go back to the Plaid credit card, and I'm going to add the APRs as a list so that my credit card can have multiple APRs as part of it. So that's my credit card data model. The last thing I want to do there is go back to the account. This is in the Plaid account field, and I'm going to do credit cards. And this is a list of Plaid credit cards. So now I have a list of Plaid credit cards. Each of those Plaid credit cards has some data about that credit card and a list of APRs. So I've just set up this section from my diagram here. Cool. Once we've got that set up, we need to set up the way to actually save that data into the database. And we're going to do this through a backend workflow API because that's going to be the most standard way to let us call this data on a regular basis. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a new API workflow, call it create credit card. And I'm going to add a whole bunch of parameters here. It's going to be like 8 or 9 of them. This is not going to be a public workflow. So I'm going to set up the keys for this. It's going to need the Plaid account that it's connected to. It's going to need the APR percentages. This is what's going to let us create that APR element a little later on. So I'm going to make that a list of numbers. APR types, this is going to be a list of texts. APR balances, subject to, this is going to be a list of numbers. Interest charge, this is actually APR interest charge. This is the last statement's interest subject to this APR. That's also going to be a list of numbers. Then I've got my other fields, is overdue. It's a yes, no. I've got last payment amount. It's a number. Last payment due. The date. A couple more fields I need here. Last statement amount. It's a number. Last statement date. It's a date. Minimum payment due is a number, and next payment due is a date. That is, if you are thinking back to the database fields we just set up, that's all the fields that'll be needed for a credit card in our database. So once we've got those set up as inputs on my API workflow, I go ahead and set up a create a thing step. I want to create a new Plaid credit card whenever I do this, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just doing some plumbing, basically, typing data from one place to another. And I can go down the list, account, APRs, institution, last payment account, last payment date, last statement balance, last statement date, minimum payment, next payment due, and overdue. We'll come back to the APRs in a second. So I'm just going to go down and do, actually I'm going to get rid of the APRs for now. We'll come back to that in a minute. I'm going to say this account's institution, because that's, if you remember from Plaid Link, that's how we set that up. This is the last payment amount, last payment due, last statement amount, last statement date, minimum payment due, next payment due, and is overdue. So that'll save the credit card into my database. We also need to deal with our APRs here. So this is something that'll just be for credit cards. We're actually going to do a new workflow. Create credit card APR. And here I'm going to do 5 fields. Same ones we saw earlier. APR percentage is number, APR type, I'm actually going to set these all up as lists. You'll see why in a second. Balance is subject to interest, charge, and the credit card to which they belong. I do that capitals differently so that I know it's an element in my database versus something else. So interest charge is a list of numbers, balance subject to is a list of numbers, APR type is a list of text, and APR percentage is a list of numbers. So those are lists. This is a credit card. Let's go ahead and set up what goes on in this workflow. In this workflow, we are going to do a recursive workflow. Create a new thing. So I'm going to create a credit card APR, fill out all the relevant fields. I think I got them all. And this time I'm going to say it's the credit card's account, the balance subject to's first item, because remember this is a list, the credit card, the credit card's institution, the last statement interests, or the interest charges first item, the APR percentages first item, and the types first item, since those are all lists. And then I'm going to add this APR that I just created to the credit card. APRs, add result of step 1, so that now my credit card record will have a list of APRs as part of it. And then I am going to schedule this workflow, this credit card API workflow, again recursively. APR percentage, items from 2, because we did the first one a second ago. In that creates, we don't need it anymore. Items from 2. Bubble has some good write-ups in the forum about how recursive workflows work. If you're confused here, I highly suggest you check those out. It's a good tool to employ when you have a lot of data going on, because then I just need to make sure I do a only when, so that this doesn't loop infinitely. Count is greater than 0. So this will happen only if I have at least one other item in that list. And that will save all the APRs correctly. So we have done here creating a credit card. We created the credit card record. We need to come back in here. We need to schedule the API workflow for those balances. So this is the lists from that create credit card API that we're passing to the APR API that we set up a second ago. And the credit card here is the one from step 1. The last thing we need to do here, if you remember in the database section, we added a field to my account record to list all of the credit cards. I just want to add that credit card that we created, the credit card record from step 1, to my Plaid account there, so that I have that relationship. That's setting up credit cards. We'll see this in action in a few minutes. For now, we're done with credit cards. We're going to go do this same thing for mortgages and student loans. So stick with me here. It's a lot of data plumbing to set up. So student loans, I'm going to do the same thing. Add student loan. Student loans have a lot more data types, or a lot more fields. So I've got my Plaid account. Account number. The one weird piece in student loans is disbursement dates is a list of dates, all the different times that this loan paid out. So that one's a little different there. Let me remind myself what this field is. Number of payments made. Number of payments remaining. An interesting thing about this liabilities data, largely it's dependent on the bank that's connected. Not all this data will appear for every loan and every connected account. Your mileage may vary depending on exactly which bank is connected. This last payment date here. Last statement date. Loan name. Loan status. and status end date. The Plaid docs go through a description a little more of what all these different fields are. If you're curious, I recommend you check that out. Minimum payment, next payment due, date, origination date, which I spell correctly. And again, you don't necessarily have to put all of this data into your app. Pick what's relevant to your use case here. But I am, for the sake of this demo, putting all the available data in so that you see what's going on. Repayment plan description, repayment plan type. Again, I just have those Plaid docs up in another screen here, and I have collapsed my credit section, and I'm just walking through all the fields here under the student section. It's just awareness of what I'm doing behind the scenes here. Sequence number. And paying attention to the data types there. So sequence number is text, even though it says number. I also, servicer address, you could store this as the different address elements. I usually pull it into a single address element, and then later if I wanted to use the bubble address type field, I could do that. Again, your mileage may vary. Year-to-date interest paid, almost done with this. Year-to-date principal paid. All right, so that is all of the fields on student loan. And the next step is very similar to credit card, where I would just go to my backend workflows, and I'm going to create a new API workflow, create student loan. So that I can reuse it many places later on. And I would just go through here and do the same thing we did last time. Nice and reusable. Again, you probably could get away without these APIs depending on your use case. You could do this directly with the create. I like to do it in APIs because it makes it nice and reusable. So I'm going to jump ahead here so you don't have to watch me type all these things in, the same things I typed in a second ago. I hope you get the picture. I'll be right back and this will be all filled out. All right, I've jumped ahead a little bit in time. All the different fields needed for this create student loan API are now filled out here, and I can go ahead and come down here and in this workflow do a very similar thing to what we did with the credit cards, and I'm going to create a new student loan with that type we just set up a few minutes ago, and do the same thing here and go through all the fields, and I'm going that are in that student loan type, and I'm going to match them to the field from the API. Once that's done, I would also do a make a change to a thing list here. And if you remember back on account, actually I think we forgot to do this, but I would go into the account type here and say student loans, and I would let there be a relationship between student loans and the account that they're part of from the account side as well. So I'll go ahead and finish this later. You can check out the Plaid sample app for the details and an example if you're looking for it. We're going to do the same thing here with mortgages. Again, I'm going to be a little hand wavy here and skip ahead in time because you can look at the sample app, but same idea, Plaid mortgages in here, and I'm going to go through and start creating all the different fields that are needed. And then when we are done, we're going to create an API. Again, I'll show you this all in a minute. Create mortgage. And I'll go through and do all the different parameters. And I'm going to skip ahead in time and show you what this looks like when it's done. Be right back. Welcome back. It's a couple minutes in the future. I have gone ahead and created in my database here, I've got student loan type, I've got mortgage type. They are all, they have fields in the Plaid account type. It's the list of Plaid mortgages, list of student loans, just like we saw in this diagram that I showed a little earlier. Then also in my workflows, I've got create mortgage and create student loan workflows that basically do the same thing. They create the appropriate data type and a new record of that data type and then add it back to the account screen. So now that we have that infrastructure all set to go, we can see the rest of the piping that we need to actually get this data saved into my application. If you remember back from our Plaid Actions video, whenever someone successfully links a bank account, we go through a number of steps. Specifically, we create an account on a list of the Plaid bank accounts to make sure we get all that data in our database. One of the things about the Plaid liabilities is, unlike transactions, there's no webhook to say, oh, the data's ready, come and get it. So in this case, what we need to do is actually know when I'm done loading the accounts to go out and get the liabilities data. What we want to be careful of is, because it's all happening in backend workflows, we don't actually want to do that until all of the accounts have been properly created in the database. So one of the things that I will do sometimes, and there's a couple different ways to handle this, is I'll actually go update this create account workflow in my backend workflow. Sorry, I'll actually, not the create account, take that back. I'll actually go, when Plaid Link is successful and when I create this Plaid institution, I will actually come in here and say that I want a new field in my institution table. It's going to be expected account count. And there's, again, a number of ways you could do this, but I'm going to set this to a number. I'm going to say this Plaid links account IDs count. And that's all the accounts that your user just connected. This is basically saying how many of them I'm expecting to have in my database, which is what this workflow, the next step here, create account, will go out and create. So what I've done and said for my institution, here's how many accounts I expect. And then what I can do is set up on the backend workflows. I can set up a trigger to say get liabilities once accounts loaded. And I can say here for the institution, whenever Plaid Institutions Now accounts count is Plaid Institution Now's expected account count, and Plaid Institution before changes accounts count is not Plaid Institution Now before changes expected account count. So what that's saying basically is whenever this fully loads up all the accounts, so the Plaid Institution Now's accounts that are set up, if you go take a look at the create account workflow, whenever that has finished creating all the accounts that I expect, go ahead and trigger this trigger. And what this trigger is going to do is actually trigger a custom event that's going to go out and get the liabilities data. So that custom event, let's go ahead and create that right now. I'm going to go create a custom event, and the reason I'm doing a custom event is we're going to need this when we get to the lifecycle stuff in a little while. I'm going to call this get liabilities data for a particular institution. And this is basically going to do a couple things in a second here. Let's go back to that trigger and finish that first. This trigger, the get liabilities, once the accounts are loaded, is just going to trigger that custom event on this Plaid institution. So let's go set up that custom event. This custom event's going to trigger those workflows we set up earlier for the create credit card, create mortgage, and create student loan. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to find loan and credit data bodies of each kind. So I want loan and credit data body liabilities credit. Then I'm going to get data from an external API, and the external API I'm getting, this is what will actually go out to Plaid and get this data, is that the loan and credit data. And I want this workflow's institution's access token, and this is going to run on create credit card. So this is going out to Plaid. Oh, and I need liabilities credit here. This is going out to Plaid and creating however many liabilities this API returns into my database that I have them. So I've got to do a couple things here. I have to do a search for the Plaid account where account ID equals this account ID, because there could be more than one account ID. Remember, in a when you're asking for Plaid data, if your user's connected many, so I need to know which one it is. I'll just do the first item there. Then I just need to go through and do all the different fields. So this will be APR percentages. This loan credit data body liabilities credits APRs types. This APRs balances. This APRs interest charge amount. Then the other fields not in that APR object, the payment amount, the payment due date, the statement amount or statement balance, the statement date, the minimum payment amount, and that next payment due. So all the fields that Plaid offers me in this loan and credit data API here. So that's going to go schedule that API workflow we created earlier, which if you remember, goes and creates the record in my database and stores it for later. Then I'm going to end up doing the same thing here 2 other times. Once I'm going to do it on, instead of credit, it's going to be on mortgage. Mortgage. This is going to do the create mortgage flow, and I'll come through here and fill out these fields in a minute. And then this other one here is going to do the student, again, liabilities, student, and use the create student loan API. So it'll go through and do all those. I'll come back and fill those out in a second. The last thing we want to do is, if you'll notice from a lot of these setups we've been doing, there's not a current balance of these different loans. There's not like a how much is owed on this credit card, how much is currently owed on this mortgage. That's because we get that information from the balances. And if you go back and watch the balances webinar, that's I believe unit 4, I talk a lot more about this. And we've already in here created a workflow here for balances. So I'm actually going to trigger that right here. I'm going to schedule an API workflow, schedule an API workflow on a list, just like I showed you in that balance webinar. And this time, instead of running it on one of the other types, I'm going to run it on the same API that I've been getting the loan data from, loan and credit data balances accounts. I want to run the get data from external API, loan and credit data for this institution's access token. And I want the accounts so all the accounts, and then I want to do the same thing here of, I can just come copy and paste my search. So I want search for the account. I want this account ID in here's first item. Then I want this body accounts, well, the balance date I'm going to set as right now, because I'm getting this data right now, the available balance, and the current balance. And you might want to update this here. Actually, I'll go do that now. Create balance. Limit balance is the other type of balance that's offered here. And I go through and I can add this to my database. This is how you can get things like that credit limit when the banks have it available. So the limit balance there. Again, come look at the sample app if you're confused about what's going on here. And back on that API where I'm triggering this, I can just do this credit body accounts balance limit because that's relevant for this particular use case. And I'll run that right now. So that's what this get liabilities data will do. Every time this custom event runs, it's going to go out to Plaid, get the current data of each of these types for any of the connected accounts. I'm going to go through and finish connecting these, and then we will go look at our UI, the screens, and set this up in a useful way and see it all working in action. I'll be right back. Welcome back. I have completed setting up the data piping that I showed you a second ago in that get liabilities data. So you'll see all the fields are now filled out here for student loans, for mortgages, and we are all set to go take a look at our UI. So I've jumped over to the liabilities page of my application. And what I have going on here is a link new account button that does everything we've looked at in previous videos. It starts a Plaid link, links it up. And then I've got just a repeating group here. Doesn't look like one, I'm only showing one row just for space reasons, and it's the way I like seeing it. And this query looks for Plaid accounts for the page's institution. So this will be one row per account. And then inside of this repeating group, you'll see a couple things going on. I list the account's name, the type, the current balance, and then I've got three different groups down here, one for credit cards, one for mortgages, and one for student loans. And what I'm going to show you here is one way that you might want to show this different data. So one of the problems with liabilities data is those three different data types we created can get hard to show in one place. So what I'll often do is I'll say this first set is a credit card, so it's the current cell's Plaid accounts credit cards. Sorry, that's the group. This is actually the account. So it's the current cell's Plaid account. And then the repeating group inside of here, sorry, I was clicked on the wrong thing. The repeating group is credit cards, and it's the parent group's accounts, credit cards. And I'll do the same thing for mortgages, where this is Plaid mortgages, and it's the parent group's accounts, mortgages, and then student loans. And I'll do the same thing here, where it's the parent group accounts, student loans. So you'll see all of that is now at the correct data types, and I can go in and I can fill in some different data here. But another thing I might want to do is say, well, this credit card group is actually going to be hidden if, so when repeating groups, this is credit cards, when the list of Plaid credit cards count is 0, then this element's not visible. Same thing for mortgages. When repeating group Plaid mortgages, list of Plaid mortgages count is 0, then this element's not visible. The same thing with student loans. When repeating groups Plaid accounts student loan list of Plaid accounts count is 0, the element's not visible. So I'm only going to see the ones that are relevant. Usually it's only going to be one per account, but this way I don't have to do something different. At my parent repeating group, I can just do it within each one. And we're going to see this in action here in just a second. Let me put some data in for each of these types. So this will be for credit cards. Maybe I'll do the, well, credit cards are a special one. Let's do this a little differently. Credit cards, I'm actually going to have another repeating group inside of this repeating group, and this is going to be the Plaid credit card APRs. So this Plaid credit card's APRs, let me give this just a single row so we can get some data in here. So I've got a bunch of repeating groups going on here. Let me put this on the outside, so this should be inside of the credit cards, and I'm just going to put in a, let's put in a statement balance due at, just to show you what's going on here, last statement balance, or last statement due, and then within APRs maybe I'll do just putting some text inside this repeating group. Lost my text element. Excited for the new responsive editor, because some of this is easier. I have not, as you'll notice, upgraded this account yet, or this app yet. There it is. So if I put this inside of this repeating group, which apparently I'm having some trouble doing. There it goes. Now it's inside this repeating group. And I can do the APRs type, and maybe I'll do the APRs interest rate, the percentage interest rate. I'll throw a percent sign on the end of that. So we're going to get there. What's the current due date of each of the credit cards, and what are the interest rates for each of them? Maybe I'd do the same thing here for mortgages. I can put some text in here to say for each mortgage, this mortgage's account number, and then maybe I also want to list this mortgage's interest rate. I can throw a percentage on the end of that, and this mortgage's interest rate type. So is it fixed or conventional? And then I can do the same thing for student loans, just to show us, hey, we do have data flowing through. And maybe I would put here for the student loans, oops, except I dropped that box, wrong place again. So the student loans, maybe the account number, and the, let me do the interest rate again. So now we should be ready to see this in action. When I go over to preview it, once it decides to load here, when I go through to preview it, there's nothing showing up in my repeating group here, which is as expected. Let's go ahead and link a new account. Once we do that, all those workflows we set up will start triggering. So I'm just in the sandbox. I'm just going to pick Wells Fargo for now. And I'm going to pick a bunch of accounts, not just the ones that are loans. I'm going to pick checking and savings too to make a point. So I'm going to pick credit card here and my student loan and my mortgage and go ahead and get those linked. And we'll start seeing all those different workflows firing and start seeing some data here. So we see a row here for each of the accounts. We've got checking and savings created. There's my credit card, there's my student loan, but you'll notice we don't see the data yet because it was waiting for that trigger to fire. The trigger did fire, and we started creating the data in the credit card, student loan, and mortgage data types, and that's what we've got going on here. So we've got a Plaid credit card. It's got a $410 balance. If I look at it, there was, it looks like 1708.77 due May 21st, 2019 at 8 p.m. The 8 p.m. might just be the way, remember, Bubble stores dates, whereas stores date times, and Plaid just stores dates, so you may want to format that differently. And it says I've got a transfer APR of 15%, and this is the repeating group, the APR's repeating group, and you can see in here special 0% APR. I've got cash APRs in here, so all sorts of different stuff. And if I keep going down, I've got student loans. This is the student loan number and its percentage, and I've got mortgage in here with a $56,000 balance and the $3 or $3.99% fixed rate mortgage. And there's a whole lot more data. If I go back into my app data and pull up, for instance, let's look at that mortgage. I can see the mortgage that got created and all the other data that exists here if I want to see it. So that's the basics of how we set up and plumb the liabilities data into the application. I showed you a way to do it in the database and store this all in this data structure here using different APIs, and showed you one way that you can handle the liabilities data in your app, albeit you'll probably want to be cleaner about the UI and the design of it than I was there, but the nested repeating groups can be a really nice way to show liabilities data. Next, we're going to take a look at how to handle liabilities lifecycle events, so when fields and new liabilities are updated. So let's get into that. So what is the context in which Plaid sends us updates? There's really two scenarios going on here, and to show you this, I'm going to go back to my backend workflows here, And in the backend workflows, if you remember from earlier videos, we've set up a Plaid webhook. And that Plaid webhook, if I go into modify types, I can see a whole bunch of different data. If you don't have this, go check out in the docs, the item errors guide. And in the item errors guide, I show you how to make sure you have all these different fields in here by hitting that modifies types and updating the raw data and pasting in this field. So in this field and in that raw data, you'd see two things that are liabilities related. It's these two here. So when Plaid has a liabilities update, we're going to get a webhook type liabilities webhook code default update. And then we're going to get two different things. We're going to get a list of account IDs with new liabilities and a list of account IDs with updated liabilities listing which field it is that was updated. Now, there's a lot of different approaches you could take here to working with this updated liabilities data. You could say, I just want to update the accounts that pop up in this account IDs with new liabilities. You could try to figure out exactly which field this is. All of those are viable. I will leave to you the exercise of exactly how to do some of those things if you wanted to do an approach that's more limited to exactly which ones are updated. The approach I'm going to take here for our demo instead is say anytime I get any information from a liabilities webhook, regardless of what's in it, I'm going to try to update all of my liabilities data to make sure it's current. And that's more of the dumb approach. It's the faster path to value. It's still going to get you the same data at the end of the day. So let's look at how we would do that. Back in my backend workflows, you'll see here that I've already got this workflow stuff set up. Got the webhooks coming in, creating a new webhook type. So I'm going to key this off of a new trigger. And this database trigger is going to be liabilities default updates. It's going to trigger off of a Plaid webhook. And this is going to be only when Plaid webhook now's type is liabilities. The only type of webhook for liabilities is a default update, so this is sufficient here. Make sure I spelled it right. I did. If you're interested in learning a little more about this in the Plaid docs under webhooks and liabilities webhook, it does talk a little more about some of the different cases here. Really, this will be fired whenever there's new liabilities or there's updates on a liability. So anytime there's a change. So what I'm going to do in my Bubble app is whenever this liabilities default update happens, I want to update the liabilities data. So I could just go in and start creating new liabilities. I could use this custom event that I did earlier to go get the most recent data. But remember, these are going to create new liabilities records. Instead, maybe what I want to do is take the old records, delete them or archive them, then have these new ones that are going to be created, replace them. So what I'm going to have my trigger do here is make changes to a thing. And the things that I'm going to have updated are... Actually, I'm going to update a list of things. Make changes to a list of things. The things that I'm going to have updated are the Plaid accounts that those liabilities are part of. So I'm going to do a search for Plaid accounts where institution equals Plaid webhook nows equals, do a search for, actually, let me do this a different way, something more efficient. So I can do a search for Plaid institution where item ID equals Plaid webhook now's item ID, because that's the identifier that's sent in the webhook. I want that institution's accounts. And the things I'm going to change are the credit cards, the student loans, and the mortgages. And I'm going to clear each of those lists. What I'm also going to do is save that relationship. So I'm going to create a new field. Actually, let me show you this in data types. Under accounts, I'm going to create a new field that's ZZZ credit cards. and this is Plaid credit cards. ZZZ student loans. Just ZZ, I'm doing two Z's. Student loans. And ZZ mortgages. So I've got 3 new fields in my account. And what I'm going to do here is say I'm basically archiving. I'm saying the old credit cards that were there, add them to the archive list. Same with the old mortgages that were there. I think I have to do... Why is that not working? Oh, add list, because it's a list. There we go. Add list, because these things are all lists. Add list, this Plaid accounts, student loans. So I'm clearing the primary fields, the credit cards. So when I search for the accounts credit cards, now these old ones won't be there anymore. And putting them in the archive set. And then I'm going to trigger the get liabilities data custom event on the same institution. All right, so there I go. This trigger, whenever I get a liabilities default update, it's going to move all the existing liabilities to the ZZZ, the archive ones, and then trigger get liabilities data, which will go and create new liabilities so that what's in my primary fields in the database will always be the most current ones, and then I can, if I need to, go through the database and figure out the differences in the old ones in that ZZZ data. That approach might not work for you. You might want to do something more targeted. You might want to set up a new workflow here, create a new workflow that just updates the account ID that you got. You might want to try doing something where it just updates the specific field. Again, your use case will dictate that. If you want to talk through any of it, send me a note, info@lostsheep.dev. Happy to talk through it via email and figure out how to make it work for your use case. So let's go ahead and see this updating process in action now that we've got the trigger set up. Back on my Plaid Liabilities page, you'll see I've got a button in here to just trigger the default update. The way we're going to do this, because the Plaid sandbox doesn't have a way to actually trigger a webhook for liabilities, we're going to cheat a little bit and just create a new webhook record directly in our database, and that'll set off the trigger, which will go through all the workflows that we just created for the update process. That should be sufficient for testing purposes. There are 3 fields we need to fill out. The first is the type, which is the thing that actually we keyed the trigger off of that we set up a second ago, so I'll call that liabilities. Error is just so that I know what I'm putting in the database here. Manually triggered from liabilities page, just so I know additional information. And then importantly, we need the item ID of the institution we are trying to update, because we need that to go get the access token to go get the right data from Plaid, so that basically so the app knows which institution this webhook is for. Once I've done that, I can go into my app and preview it, and let's see it in action. I can go ahead and link a new account. Use Citibank this time. Can pick a couple accounts here. I'm just going to do checking, credit card, student loan, and mortgage, because we're focused on those couple loan accounts. And as I go through that workflow, we'll see all the workflows we've set up in this video happening here. The account creation's going on there. So there's the checking, credit card, student loan. There's the individual detail on each credit card object, the APRs in there, the student loan with the interest rate and the mortgage with the interest rate exactly as we set up. And then if I hit this liabilities default update, we will see it clear out. There you go. The credit card, student loan, and mortgage all cleared out here. And we should, in a second, see them come back with the new ones. And there they are. They just came back. And I can go look at this in the database real quick just to satisfy ourselves. So if I go in the database and look at some of my newest accounts here, so like here's the mortgages account. I have the mortgage here, the ZZZ mortgage here. So there's the new and the old version, and if the data was updated between them, I could compare the two, but I have what's the most current data and then the old ones here. It would be the same thing with student loans and credit cards. So we've looked at today a lot of stuff. We did a whole bunch of plumbing of data, building a bunch of APIs, one for credit cards, student loans, and mortgages, and data types for each. We looked at how you display that data, one way to display that data in the application, and we looked at how to handle the Plaid Liabilities webhooks that'll fire whenever there's an update or a new liability for the different accounts. I hope this has been informative and gets you started integrating liabilities into your application. As always, get in touch, info@lostsheep.dev if you run into any problems or have any questions. Thanks for watching.